Clean it up. Now. The command cut through the opulent silence of the penthouse library. Alastair Finch gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist. A stack of glossy prospectuses slid from the polished mahogany table, scattering across the marble floor like fallen leaves. Kalen didn't look up. He simply knelt. His hands, steady and sure, began gathering the scattered papers. He wore simple jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, the unofficial uniform of someone who did not belong in a room where billions of dollars were being discussed. Finch smirked, turning to his guests. Two investors from Riyadh, dressed in immaculate thobs. He wanted to impress them, to project an aura of absolute power. The presence of the housekeeper's son was an inconvenient blemish, a piece of dust to be swept away. He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. He switched to a smooth, confident Arabic. "My apologies for the interruption," Finch said, his tone oozing false courtesy. "You have to be firm with these people. This is the helps boy, utterly useless, like his mother." A cruel laugh followed. The investors offered tight, polite smiles, their eyes shifting uncomfortably toward the young man on the floor. Kalen's movements did not falter. He continued collecting the documents, his expression unreadable. But inside, something clicked. A switch was flipped. A process was initiated. His mind, a precision instrument, began recording. The tone, the words, the condescending laughter. It was all data. He complied. He always complied. It was the foundation of his work. To be invisible, to be underestimated. It was his greatest weapon. He had come here for his mother. Imani had worked for Alastair Finch for 15 years, the silent, dignified head of his household staff. After a minor but painful surgery on her knee, she was supposed to be resting. But Finch, a man who measured the world in services rendered, had demanded she personally oversee the preparations for this meeting. Kalen had insisted on coming with her. He had offered to handle the final touches, arranging refreshments, ensuring the room was perfect so she could stay off her feet. He was on a rare sabbatical, a quiet period between monumental tasks, and spending time with his mother was the only thing he wanted. This life, this world of quiet servitude, was a universe away from his own. His world was one of encrypted servers, of shadowy shell corporations, of numbers that lied and the complex truths they concealed. He was a forensic accountant, but that title was a gross oversimplification. He was a hunter. He tracked monsters through the tangled jungles of international finance. He held degrees from Cambridge and MIT. He spoke 7 languages fluently. He was the one governments and global corporations called when billions vanished into thin air. He operated in silence, his name a closely guarded secret in the highest echelons of power. To Alastair Finch, he was just the housekeeper's son, an object. Across the room, a young man shifted on his feet. Leo, Finch's junior executive assistant, felt a familiar knot of acid churn in his stomach. He was 24, ambitious, and utterly trapped. He saw the blatant cruelty in his boss, the casual disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him. Leo had seen Finch berate waiters, insult pilots, and fire gardeners for the slightest perceived infraction. But this was different. The cold, quiet way the young man on the floor endured the humiliation was unsettling. There was no flicker of anger, no sign of fear, just a profound, unnerving stillness. Leo had seen that young man, Kalen, arrive with his mother earlier. He had been gentle and attentive, helping her into a chair, his voice a low, respectful murmur. He radiated a quiet intelligence that seemed completely at odds with Finch's dismissive caricature. Finch, puffed up with his own performance, continued his monologue in Arabic, embellishing his own financial genius. He saw Kalen's silence as weakness. He saw his compliance as proof of his own superiority. He was a man who only understood dominance and submission. Emboldened, Finch decided to escalate. The investors were not yet fully committed. He needed a final display of his untouchable status. He pointed a finger at Kalen, who was now rising, the stack of papers held neatly in one hand. "This is what I'm talking about," Finch said to his guests in English, a showman playing to the crowd. No ambition, no drive, content to live on scraps. He then snatched a delicate porcelain cup of coffee from the tray Kalen had prepared. He took a sip, grimaced, and deliberately tipped the cup. Hot, Dark liquid splashed onto the neat stack of prospectuses Kalen held. It dripped onto his gray t-shirt and the pristine marble floor. Useless, Finch spat. Completely useless. You've ruined these. Go get fresh copies. And clean this mess. Silence. The investors exchanged a glance. This was beyond business posturing. It was raw, ugly cruelty. Leo's hand tightened into a fist at his side. He wanted to speak, to scream, to do something. But fear held him paralyzed. His student loans were a mountain. His family depended on his salary. Alastair Finch could destroy his career with a single phone call. Kalen looked down at the coffee stains spreading across the documents. He didn't look at Finch. He didn't look at anyone. His focus was entirely on the papers in his hand. The liquid had made the ink bleed slightly on the top page. It was a summary of asset holdings. His mind, always working, always analyzing, snagged on a name. Al-Sadiq Holdings, S.A. A phantom echo from a case 2 years ago. A Brazilian infrastructure company that had collapsed overnight, its pension fund vaporized. The money had been funneled through dozens of shell corporations. Al-Sadiq Holdings was one of the final, untraceable destinations. It was a black hole. And here it was again, in Alastair Finch's penthouse. Kalen's unnatural calm intensified. It was no longer just about enduring. It was about observing, documenting. The insult, the spilled coffee, the public humiliation, it was all noise. The signal was here, in his hands. He carefully placed the stained documents on a side table. He turned to get a cloth to clean the floor. As he moved, his eyes scanned the entire room. The laptop open on Leo's desk. The other files on the main table. The subtle tension in the investor's posture. He was building a complete picture. Finch saw this methodical calm as insolence. He wanted a reaction. He wanted fear, or at least angry frustration. This quiet dignity was a challenge to his authority. Did you hear me? Finch's voice rose, cracking the veneer of sophistication. I told you to clean it up. Kalen retrieved a cloth from the service cart and returned to the spill. He knelt a second time. As he wiped the marble, his eyes swept over the papers scattered on the lower shelf of a nearby coffee table. Financial projections, liability reports. His mind absorbed the numbers, the names, the dates, processing them with terrifying speed. Gibraltar, Panama, the Cayman Islands. A familiar constellation of corporate obfuscation. It was sloppy, incredibly sloppy. Finch was arrogant. He believed his wealth and his lawyers made him invincible. He didn't bother to properly hide his tracks. He just buried them under layers of legal jargon he assumed no one would ever have the expertise or the authority to penetrate. Leo watched, mesmerized. He saw it now. Kalen wasn't just cleaning. He was reading. His eyes moved with a systematic precision that Leo, who stared at spreadsheets all day, recognized as a form of high-speed data acquisition. He was scanning everything. The breaking point arrived, as it always does, with a single, irreversible act of contempt. Finch, seeing the investors' growing unease, decided to deliver his closing argument. He turned back to them, gesturing grandly around the room, a king in his castle. He spoke in Arabic again, his voice dripping with condescension, aimed at Kalen but for the benefit of his audience. Do not concern yourselves with the minor distractions, he said. The world is divided. There are those who build empires, he tapped his own chest, and there are those who clean the floors. It is the natural order. People like this, he gestured to Kalen, are too stupid to even count, let alone read. It's a blessing, in a way, a simple mind for a simple life. That was it. The insult was no longer just about Kalen. It was about his mother. It was about the quiet dignity of her work, the years she had spent maintaining this palace for a man who saw her as less than human. It was the casual dismissal of an entire class of people, the invisible pillars who held up the world for men like Finch. The trap was now set, and the bait had been taken. The conflict would not be resolved here, in Finch's seat of power. It would be concluded in a venue where Finch's authority was an illusion. But the opening move had to be made now. Kalen slowly rose to his feet. He left the cloth on the floor. He walked not to the door, but back to the side table where he had placed the coffee-stained prospectus. He picked up the top sheet. His posture changed. The slight slump of the service worker vanished. He stood taller, his shoulders squared. The air around him seemed to grow still and cold. He turned to face Alastair Finch. The investors, Leo, everyone in the room felt the sudden shift in gravity. All eyes were on him. Kalen looked directly at Finch. He held up the stained paper, and he spoke. His Arabic was not the conversational dialect Finch had been using. It was pure, formal, classical Arabic, the language of scholars and diplomats. Flawless, precise, devastating. "Excuse me, Mr. Finch," Kalen began, his voice calm and level, yet it resonated through the room like a verdict. "I have a question regarding this document. Could you please clarify the asset allocation for the Al-Sadiq holding referenced on page 12? The world stopped. Finch's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, dissolved. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, gray canvas of shock. His jaw worked, but no sound emerged. The two investors from Riyadh stared, their mouths slightly agape. They understood not just the words, but the profound implication of the accent, the grammar, the sheer, impossible fluency. Kalen didn't wait for an answer. He continued, his voice relentless. "Because it appears to directly conflict with the liability statement from your Gibraltar subsidiary, Finch Atlantic Limited, as detailed in the appendix. The numbers suggest a classic phantom asset structure, designed to inflate the company's net worth by at least 40%. It's a clever bit of accounting, but fatally transparent if you know where to look." He paused, then switched to perfect, unaccented English, his gaze shifting to include Leo and the now terrified-looking company lawyer who had been silent in the corner. "The entire prospectus is a work of fiction," Kalen stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The revenue projections are based on non-existent contracts. The international holdings are a series of nested shell corporations leading back to a single, unaudited fund in Panama. A fund, I might add, that was flagged by Interpol 3 years ago for money laundering." Finch finally found his voice. It was a strangled, pathetic squawk. Who do you think you are? You're the help. Security. Get him out of here." But no one moved. The investors were already quietly standing, their faces grim. They were not just businessmen. They were representatives of a royal fund. To be drawn into a potential fraud of this magnitude was a catastrophic insult. This was the moment Leo had been waiting for, though he hadn't known it. The fear was still there, a cold snake in his gut, but it was overshadowed by a new, exhilarating feeling, a sense of rightness. He stepped forward, holding up his company tablet. "He is correct," Leo said, his voice shaking but clear. "I've been flagging these discrepancies for months. Mr. Finch and his CFO, Marcus Thorne, told me they were aggressive but legal accounting strategies. They instructed me to bury the reports." He tapped the screen. "Here are the emails. Here are the original internal audits that were altered before being sent to the investors." The dam broke. Finch erupted in a torrent of threats and denials. He lunged for Leo's tablet, but one of the investors' security guards, a large man who had been standing impassively by the door, stepped in his way. Kalen took out his phone. It was a simple, unassuming device, but it was one of the most secure in the world. He made a single call. "Director Rostova, please," he said calmly. A moment's pause. "Eva, it's Kalen. I'm sorry to use this line. I'm at the residence of Alistair Finch. I found another one. It's a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme built on phantom assets. It's bigger and far more brazen than the Petrocorp case." He listened for a moment. "Yes, I have corroboration from an internal witness and primary source documents. I'd recommend a full asset freeze, effective immediately. Warrants for Finch and his CFO, Marcus Thorne." He glanced at the terrified company lawyer. "And probably his general counsel, for conspiracy to commit fraud." He ended the call. The fallout was not just swift. It was instantaneous. Before Finch could even process what had happened, the private elevator to the penthouse chimed. The doors opened not to building security, but to 6 men and 2 women in dark suits with federal insignia on their jackets. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that spoke of immense authority. At their lead was a woman with sharp eyes and an iron-gray bun. She nodded once at Kalen. "Kalen, thank you for the call." She produced a warrant from her jacket. "Alistair Finch, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The collapse was total. Finch's world, built on a foundation of arrogance and deceit, crumbled in less than 5 minutes. As agents placed him in restraints, His face was a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. He kept staring at Kalen, his mind unable to bridge the chasm between the housekeeper's son and the man who had just dismantled his entire life with a single phone call. The investigation, fueled by Kalen's precise analysis and Leo's trove of internal documents, was a surgical strike. Finch's assets were frozen worldwide. Marcus Thorne was arrested at his country club, pulled off the ninth green in handcuffs. The board of directors, the enablers who had looked the other way in exchange for lavish returns, were all implicated. The news exploded. Billionaire Finch arrested in massive fraud scheme. The stories focused on the scale of the crime, but a tantalizing detail soon emerged and captured the public's imagination. The whistleblower was not a rival executive or a government analyst. He was the son of Finch's own housekeeper. The media frenzy was intense, but Kalen vanished from the public eye as quickly as he had appeared. He gave his deposition, handed over his analysis, and ensured his mother was moved to a secure, comfortable new home, far from the wreckage of Finch's life. Imani watched the news reports, her heart swelling with a fierce, profound pride. She had always known her son was brilliant. She had sacrificed everything so he could have the education she never did. To see him use that brilliance not for wealth, but for justice, was the greatest reward of her life. The consequences for the guilty were severe and public. Alastair Finch, denied bail as a flight risk, saw his empire liquidated. He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary, a place where his money and name meant nothing. Marcus Thorne, in exchange for his testimony, received 15. The other complicit board members were ruined, facing years of litigation and public shame. Leo became the prosecution's star witness. His courage was publicly lauded. After the trial, he was approached by the new oversight committee appointed to manage the dissolution of Finch's assets. They didn't just offer him a job. They offered him a senior role, recognizing the integrity and analytical skill he had demonstrated. The ripples of Kalen's actions spread further. The sheer audacity of Finch's fraud, exposed in such a dramatic fashion, spurred a congressional inquiry. 6 months later, the Corporate Integrity and Accountability Act, known colloquially as the Finch Act, was signed into law. It introduced draconian penalties for executive-level fraud and created new protections for internal whistleblowers. Systemic change had begun. Months passed. Kalen was in a sterile conference room in Washington, D.C. He was no longer the invisible man. He had accepted Director Rostova's offer. He now led a new, elite task force within the SEC, hunting the biggest financial predators on the planet. He was briefing his team on a new case, his voice calm, precise, and authoritative. That evening, he sat with his mother on the balcony of her new home, overlooking a quiet garden. The sun was setting. There were no headlines to read, no calls to make. There was only peace. She reached over and took his hand. "I am so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Kalen smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "He thought we were invisible," he said softly. He was wrong. He just wasn't looking properly. He had shown Alastair Finch and the world that dignity is not conferred by wealth or status. He proved that true power lies not in the ability to command, but in the quiet courage to see the truth and to speak it, no matter the cost. And in the silent spaces, where the overlooked and underestimated live, the most potent agents of change are often found, waiting for their moment.